Hi everyone, I hope you're as excited as I am in this journey we're about to embark on with Anatomy and Physiology 1. This is one of my most interesting courses, and you would know for obvious reasons because it's talking about the human anatomy and physiology, right? And this is just going to be the first section of it, Anatomy and Physiology 1, as we typically call it in class. And of course, there's going to be a second section, which is Anatomy and Physiology 2. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of anatomy and physiology in terms of the classes, the chapters we'll be covering, I wanted to do this right here, which is the 7 tips that I believe would help you make an A in your class. My name is Dapo Ramade, also known as Daniel Tutors. So every once in a while, you would see Daniel Tutors, Daniel Tutors, Daniel Tutors. Yeah, it's just some cool name I like to go with. Anyways, so I'm breaking down those tips into 7 tips that I believe would help you make an A in class. Now, I'm mindful most of the tips I'm talking about here are tips that involve an actual traditional classroom. That doesn't mean you cannot apply it to an online class if you're taking this class online. So I broke them down into 3 different sections, which is what's happening before class, meaning before you go to the class to cover the chapter or the material that the teacher will cover in class, right? So what I mean is, let's say you would be going over the first chapter of Anatomy and Physiology 1 on Monday, and today is Sunday, right? So that would be before class. Now, while you are in class would be the second category, which I call during class, right? This is while you are in class with the teacher going over the material. And then after the class is done on Monday, in this instance, what is going on after the class, right? Which is what I call after the class, right? Why did the chicken cross the road? Just because. All right, that's another thing I like to point out. I somewhere in my head think I'm a comedian, so I would give like some ridiculous jokes here and there, but don't worry about it. If it's not funny, still laugh or I will get to you. No? Never mind. All right, so let's get back to this. So before class, there are a few things I want you to do. The first one, which I call tip number 1, is you need to watch a video before reviewing the materials given in class. And this is pretty important. So let's say chapter 2 is a good example. We'll go over atoms and things that are chemistry related, and you have no idea, you haven't read it, or maybe you still have a glimpse somewhere. But the first thing you want to do is watch a video. Go on YouTube usually, but since you're taking this course, you want to watch the chapter. I cover this chapter, right? So you want to definitely make sure you're watching it before you go to class to take the material, to have the material covered. And mind you, I also want you to know that this would apply to other classes, not necessarily just anatomy and physiology, but just get the concept down. So you want to watch a video, and this is pretty key. While you're watching the video, the idea isn't necessarily to like assimilate all the information. It's almost like you're just getting the ground wet, right? You want to get the general gist of it. So as it starts talking about matter, atoms, and things like that, you're just hearing those keywords, some words you haven't heard before. So it's your first time hearing it. Don't keep rewinding, pausing, rewinding. That's not the point here. The point is just to get you used to the subject matter, right? So you could be in the kitchen, you could be cooking, you could be driving, you could be eating, you could be doing anything. But while doing all of this process is going on. Right, where you're listening, your brain is getting exposed to the material. Could be for the first time or could be a review for you. But either ways, you're doing this, right? So once you're done watching this, and the second step, which I'll call tip number 2, is for you to study your instructor's PowerPoint, right? Now, this isn't always the case because I know some classes your instructor wouldn't give a PowerPoint, and especially if it's the first chapter, maybe you don't have it. So it might only apply to chapters after. But if you do have it, this is very important. In fact, almost my most important tip, if you want to put it that way. Well, maybe not, who knows. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is this is so important because most times your instructor, and I use the word most times because I fall in that category. I know as a professor I do this, but I know not all professors will do it. But most times, keyword most, professors teach out of their PowerPoint slides, right? So they read the book, they cover different materials, but the main focus, I would say good main focus, about 90%, if not more, of materials you would be tested on is already on the PowerPoint slide, right? Now the question is, how would the professor put the questions, how would they like word their questions, I would say, and things like that. So that's where the important like trying to understand that will come into play. But prior to going to class, you just go over the materials on the PowerPoint. You see it in bullet points depending on how it's presented. Now you've already watched the video and some keywords already in your mind, hopefully, and you're just going down the list and saying, oh, okay, the instructor, the professor, whoever it is, really wants this material or like this, right? And sometimes it's a lot of materials, but at least it helps you narrow things down as you go with it. Now, whenever you're done with this part, this is when you really want to pick up your textbook and study it. And I use the word study, right? Like not just like peruse, read over it. You want to really peruse it, like study it, get a good grasp of it, right? So once again, you watch the video, you went over your instructor's PowerPoint, and now you're reading the text. So by the time you're reading this, there are some things you will see in your textbook that like, it looks like it's excessive or not. Now, you could go with the idea of, well, I already know what my professor most likely wants because looking at the instructor PowerPoints, these were the things that were the focus points, right? So you go over that and then you're good to go for everything you need to do before class. Mind you, you have to keep doing this before every chapter is covered, right? So let's say you do all of this for chapter 1 and chapter 1 was covered on Monday. By Wednesday, which is most likely going to be the case when chapter 2 is covered or something like that, you want to make sure you do the same thing for chapter 2, right? So it depends on how you want to like put all information together, on how busy you might be sometimes, but just make sure you achieve this much before the material is covered in class, right? And I say this especially when I tell people this is the tip to making an A in your class, and like, ooh, sounds like magic. There's really no magic to it. It's hard work. But from a professorial standpoint, I've seen a lot of students work really hard and they still don't make the grade, and it's because they don't put these things in order, right? So once again, let's do a quick review before class. You watch a video, then read the instructor PowerPoint, then you study the book. Right now, you should be really equipped, ready to go, and be ready to answer whatever questions the instructor might have, the professor might have in class. So the next step would be what's going on during class, right? So for this, we'll cover 2 main tips. The first one, this is a little bit here and there depending on your personality, but if you can handle it, I always recommend you sit close to the front of the class, and this depends on the size of the class as well. But if you can achieve the first 2 rows, if you can make it there, feel comfortable enough, which I hope you all can get comfortable enough with, you always want to sit between the first and second row. Now, this doesn't mean if you don't get those first 2 rows, you can't make an A in the class. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying it puts you in a better position. And the reason why this is the case is whenever you sit in the first 2 rows, first things first, most likely the professor would see you, right? You want the professor to see you in class. And why is this important? Well, in a way, subconsciously, you as a human, when you know the professor sees you, you almost want to do well, right? You don't want the professor to know you as that student who sucks, for lack of a better word, in the class. But that's not all there is to it as well, because the next tip that I'll talk about also buttresses this, right? So you sit in front of a class, but it also makes it comfortable for you, hopefully, to ask questions in class, right? You want to be able to ask questions in class so the instructor can know you, or the professor can. Now, that's the 5th tip, which is ask and answer questions. You want to be able to find a good way to combine these two to make it work out, right? So first of all, you're sitting in front of the class and now you're asking questions when you're not sure about something, but you're also answering questions when the teacher asks a question and you have the answer to it, right? These 2 coupled together actually helps you like feel comfortable enough with the professor feels comfortable with you, and it's also helpful, especially when it comes to grading. And this might sound wrong to some of you, but it's not really. I, as a professor, there are some times when like I would give essay type questions and the wordings might be a little bit of the answers the students is giving me might be a little bit iffy. Like I'm not sure what they're trying to say, or I think they might know it or they might not know it. Now, if you're a student that I'm conscious of, like in class, that's answering questions, I'm like, okay, this student, he or she, is usually answering questions. So I'm thinking probably she knows what she's talking about, or he knows what he's talking about. Now I'm reading that over again. I'm trying to look for keywords, and it helps me like grade better. Now, if you're a student that I just don't remember who you are, I don't know how active you are in class, now I'm forced to like just try to make the best out of it, which is not always good for a student, right? So once again, it's not about being biased towards anyone. It's just it helps from a grading perspective, knowing that the student is actively asking and answering questions. But the other part that really helps the student with this tip is when you ask and answer questions, remember you've already studied the material. At this point, when the teacher is teaching in class, you're following their PowerPoints because you're already familiar with it. I know a lot of my students will print it out or have like the computer or something they can follow, but you're already familiar with it. So every time a professor is like stressing something, you probably have an idea what they're talking about, right? But if you're not clear on it, that's a good time to ask a question. And as you continue with this, you will start noticing a pattern with a professor. Most humans have this pattern. So when they're talking about things, you have an idea of this is probably going to be on the test, because you start noticing a certain like it's habits, like it's kind of hard to hide. So that's where it comes into play. So you ask questions, answer questions, ask questions, answer questions. So that covers tip 4 and tip 5. Now, the last 2 tips are things you do after class. Oh, and now quickly, let's go back to tip 4 and 5, because I know some of you are probably taking online classes and you're like, how would I sit in front of the class? Well, in this case, tip 5, where you're asking and answering question, is pretty much where you shine on this, right? As much as possible, if you're going online class, the idea of sitting in front of the row is almost like making sure you sign in on time. So if you're actually having like a face-to-face lecture, like via Blackboard, Connect, Zoom, or whichever process, you want to like sign in on time, right? So if it's like 5 minutes, whatever time it's allowed in, you want to sign in as early as possible. Because most times when I get into my classes that I teach online, I look at the students that are there already, and then sometimes I have like 1, maybe just 2 or 3. But that's the same concept, because by the time other students start joining in, I can't keep up with who just joined in. But those few that have joined in, it's almost like the students that sit in front of class. And then once again, you're answering questions, you're asking questions. I'm looking at the name of the person who's doing this, right? So those are ways you could apply the same tips towards online classes. So now back to the last set of tips, which is what you're doing after class, right? The first thing you want to do after you're done with class is you want to review the material. And this is key, right? And because you've gotten all this information and you feel good with it, right? Which you should. Now you want to make sure it stays. And the first thing is you want to test yourself. All right. So already, if you're taking this course, or if you're thinking of taking this course, which I highly recommend you take, of course, you would see I have a bunch of like questions, like test questions, a lot of them. I have like about at least 1,000, yeah, probably more than that questions, and you can get to like take different tests over and over again and get different questions, right? But if you're not, let's say you're not taking this course right now, or you're taking a different course, you can always go online as well and try to look and see if you can find like quiz questions. So you could go on Google and just Google something like Anatomy and Physiology tests, practice test questions, things like that. And you want to practice questions in relating to that chapter, right? The more you practice it, the more it solidifies your knowledge, right? So, and then the more it also exposes things you might not have understood properly, right? So you go ahead and practice it. Most textbooks, because we'll be using McGraw-Hill, I use McGraw-Hill for this course, but at the end of each chapter, they have questions, like they have questions that are multiple choice questions. They have questions that are critical thinking type questions. You want to like address these questions and see if you really get the material as well as you think you do. And once you do this and you feel comfortable enough, the last one is my favorite. I know I said tip 2 I believe was the best, but my favorite is the study group. I say it's my favorite because I think it solidifies everything, but it's not always convenient. I understand that people have work and things like that. But the last tip number 7, is a study group, right? You want to form a study group if you can, right? You can do it virtually, you can do it in person, different options are out there for you. But the key part is when you go to the study group, you want to make sure you have gone through the first 6 tips, right? I've seen a lot of students that would join study groups. Sometimes it's good for them, sometimes actually detrimental, and you don't want that to be you, because they go there expecting to learn in the study group, right? I'm not saying you would not learn in the study group, but you should go expecting to teach in the study group. This was one of my biggest secrets when I was in college and I graduated with a 4.0 GPA, which is when I'm done with all my 6 tips, I go in there, my study group, and there's always a student, like, there's always at least one student, I should say, that, oh, they've just been too busy, or I mean, some of them are just too lazy. I hope that's not you, but this is a point where they want to come and get all the information they didn't get prior. And this is where I jump in. I try to explain it to them, because if I can explain it to them, that means I am fully comfortable that I know what I'm talking about, right? And this is key, right? So make sure you find a study group, 2, 3, a few people. And if you have a good study group where everyone else have studied and done their due diligence before coming, that's even better, because then you guys can teach each other, but also you can also broaden your horizon in concept of, you could say, okay, I think he probably would test us on this because of the way he talked about this, why, things like that to it. So pretty much that covers the 7 tips I have for you. And remember, it's mostly application. You take it and apply it, right? The hard work still comes into play, because some people are like, oh, that sounds like a lot of hours to put in. Well, if you're planning to take anatomy and physiology, you definitely need to put in a lot of hours. Now, what you want to do is put in those hours efficiently so that you can get the best out of it. So just put it in, like, take the effort and make sure you come out of the class with your head high. Anyways, I hope you end up going on ahead and taking this course and, apply the material pretty much for you. I believe if you take this course, you'll be in a really good place. If you're taking the class in the future, or if you're trying to get into medical school, nursing school, and different things you could try to use it for. All right, I'm really, really excited for this journey, and I hope you guys would enjoy it. See you in chapter 1, if you choose to take this class of Anatomy and Physiology 1 with Daniel Tudors. Peace out.